Lady Butterfly is a great boss and the one that made me fall in love with the game. When I think of Sekiro and its bosses, I think of 1 versus 1, sword clashing against sword, and Lady Butterfly is the first great example of that. It's not very complex at all, and that may be boring for fans of the other games, but I always found that FromSoft's at their best when it's no unnecessary ganks, crazy laser beam one-shots of death, no AoE massive explosions, just a one-on-one duel that in a way personifies the game for me. Oh, and bonus points for her jumping attacks. It was just the right amount of anime weave done without becoming silly and laughable. The Phantom is a great example of Sekiro being called a rhythm game with the back and forth attacking and deflecting combat. The perilous attack that fulfilled my desire of being crushed between an elderly woman's thighs offered a nice mix-up to keep you on your toes and not get too comfortable. My biggest criticism for Lady Butterfly is that Phase 2 transition. I don't understand why they even bothered. You can even just run to the opposite side of the arena and not really have much issue. It's just a boring interlude that I don't think was needed at all. If all they added was their butterfly projectiles for Phase 2, that could have been enough to keep Phase 2 just different enough and interesting. If you are struggling though, you can take them out from afar with some shuriken attacks. I've seen a lot of complaints about her AI and how Lady Butterfly can be easily manipulated by hitting her and moving to her right, trivialize the entire encounter. But it's yet another example why the best way to play video games, or any media really, is to go in completely blind. That may make her easy and almost cheesy in a way, but after going in completely clueless, I had no idea, and that gave me the true experience, which is a great 1 versus 1 duel. Overall, Lady Butterfly is not too hard on subsequent playthroughs, which does hold back her ranking, but I spent the entire pandemic cutting down U-trees at the Grand Exchange, so I know I'm easily manipulated by nostalgia, and I placed her in the B tier. First up in our Sekiro boss ranking is Gyobu Masataka Oniwa. The voice actor seriously knew the assignment. Give that man a raise. The entrance is 10 out of 10, but what about the fight itself? Well, it's a mixed bag for me. I liked the idea of an enemy riding on horseback, but in practice it didn't really work too well. I think Sekiro is at its best face to face against your enemy, but Gyobu riding around the arena didn't offer much outside of just a few seconds to catch your breath, and it felt a little awkward. His giant glaive weapon could have also been a nice change of pace with its long reach and wide sweeping attacks. This is one of the few bosses in this great game with what I found to be very bad hitboxes. Years later, no matter how many times I face off with him, no matter how much better at the game I get, there will always be at least 1 or 2 attacks that I know I shouldn't have been hit by and will be anyway. Sekiro has practically no bad bosses. It's in my opinion the most loaded boss roster a video game has ever had. Even a mediocre Sekiro boss is a blast to cross swords with, and this is no exception. In any other game, he'd be near the top, but in Sekiro, he just comes in at the C tier. Genichrio Ashina is known in the Salami family as the boss that changed Shawnee as a man. Let me take you back a few years ago to the COVID pandemic. I moved back home for lockdown, and with all my free time out of work, I finally decided to give Sekiro a go. Despite its great challenge, I was loving every minute of the game, and I couldn't shut up about it. But that changed when it was time to take on the legendary Ashina swordsman himself, Genichiro. I sat looking at my screen, fighting him for 9 hours straight. I'm not kidding. I walked upstairs, and my mom asked me if I was okay, and I looked at her with the 1,000-yard stare of a soldier in World War I that had just survived trench warfare. I told her I had done the same thing 9 hours straight without accomplishing anything, and I couldn't even explain what I was doing wrong or how to figure it out. Ichiro is the perfect skill check boss, maybe the best one ever in gaming. No cheese, nothing to exploit, no summons like the Souls series. After years of being conditioned by Dark Souls and its more passive, read and react gameplay and using dodging iframes, this new combat system of all-out aggression and pressing the attack was a very uncomfortable feeling. But when I saw how quickly his posture was recovering, I realized I didn't have any choice. If you do hang back or play too passive, Genichiro will be happy to remind you that hesitation is defeat in the form of Boromiring you with his bow. And that's only the first example of how almost every attack in his arsenal is teaching you a different part of this new combat. In this epic rematch, Makiri counters are a must, and by the time I left the Ashina castle, they became second nature. His perilous attack that was a sweep is easily punished by Goomba stomping his head. It was starting to become obvious that I shouldn't be afraid of priceless attacks anymore, and there are actually opportunities to take advantage of. Mashing R1 may have got you through the previous bosses with enough time and effort, but Genichiro is going to make sure you break that habit. He will leap backwards, shoot a volley of arrows, and if you're just pressing R1 over and over again, you will not have your sword up in time to block or move out of the way. If you somehow haven't learned to this point that another key of Sekiro's combat is the perfect parries, defending his ferocious flurry of sword attacks will build up that posture fast. It serves as a teaching moment that deflecting is also a form of offense and not just defending yourself if you time it correctly. Phase 2 introduces his lightning of Tomoe attack, and jumping into it and sending it back to him is absolutely exhilarating. It does tremendous damage to his lower health pool, making Phase 2 much easier. The inner version of Genichiro has a few changes to make the boss a ton harder, and this greatly adds to his replay value. His Sekiro dance does a ton of damage and is a huge threat all the time that you have to watch out for. He has more health and it's harder to fill his posture bar, and that's made even more challenging because he is a lot more aggressive as well. It keeps you on the defense and you're not constantly pressing the attack like you would. There's more of a balance and back and forth to it. And last but not least, he can send your lightning reversals right back at you, Ganondorf tennis style. All in all, it adds a ton of replay value to the fight. His use as your rival also shows how far you've come learning the combat as a player, just as Wolf has become a better swordsman. Your first encounter, Wolf slowly takes out his sword. In a fight, Genichiro ends up wiping the floor with you. The second encounter, you take it out faster and much more confident, and it ends up in a very even fight where you come out on top. In the third fight, you unsheath your blade with zero hesitation whatsoever, proceed to beat his ass a lot of times without even getting hit. It's absurdly difficult on your first playthrough, but coming back to him in the base version, where he becomes quite possibly the easiest base game boss, perfectly shows how he works as a skill check. Overall, with the added replay value that's offered in the reflection of strength challenges, Genichiro is sensational, and for me is a top 10 boss in the Soulsborne series and easily in the S tier. Guardian Ape is a goddamn lunatic. This dude attacks with reckless abandon and leaves you on the defense. It doesn't feel like a Sekiro boss. I'd even say a lot of the time I do end up dodging attacks instead of deflecting every single one, and there's less emphasis on staying aggressive and filling his posture bar. Chipping away at his health before putting serious work on that posture bar is definitely the play here. However, I thought it worked well enough that it was a nice change of pace from the other bosses we fought to this point that were our more standard 1 vs 1 duels. My main complaints are that grab attack can be pretty ridiculous and range inducing with their hitboxes, and call me old fashioned, but its poop attack is too goofy for me. I get it's funny, but it doesn't fit the tone of this dark fantasy version of Japan at all. Hanging on for dear life in our battle against this angry ape is pure adrenaline. Essentially, the way he plays is different and it works. And then you have one of the most legendary moments in the Soul series. You get a death blow, the music stops, and the Shinobi execution message pops up. But seconds later, he picks up his own head and wields the sword in him as his own weapon. Because FromSoft doesn't drop a surprise boss phase often, it makes it so much more impactful when they do. If I were to compare it to the Soul series, Phase 1 it feels like a Dark Souls giant monster fight, and Phase 2 it feels like the more standard knight with the sword fight. The stark difference in them probably makes the totally normal and not cult-like members of the Bloodborne fandom hyperventilate, and just see them typing with their Dorito-crusted fingers, "Is this a Ludwig reference?" to anybody who would listen. But I digress. The phase is a lot easier in my opinion, and the sword is much more simple to deflect than the Guardian's pummeling fist attacks, and he has a ton of openings like his dive that will leave him open for a ton of hits. I love that he plays completely differently than the first plays, and in the world of Sekiro's amazing bosses, I would say this boss is solidly B tier in gameplay, but the shock of the whole second phase transition easily puts it into the A tier when you count the experience as a whole. And next up we have the Headless Ape, and this is a bad boss for a lot of reasons. Number one is it's a gank fight, and we know at this point, FromSoft does just not have a good track record making these gank bosses. Really think about it, and there's only a few good ones that come to mind. I do think because their first major success as a game was the first Dark Souls, that they've been trying to chase the high of Ornstein and Samao ever since, and the Headless Ape is yet another boss moving away from the formula that made that boss work. The first time you cross swords with Ornstein and Samao, it becomes very obvious that you're supposed to separate each enemy by using the pillars and the environment to fight one at a time. In the Headless Arena, it's just a wide open space, and you're trying to control which one you're fighting through distance alone. For me, most of the time I was only able to do this was when the Guardian Ape would scream and do its terror attack. Essentially, most of that phase boiled down to running away, baiting out that attack, and getting a few hits in, rinse and repeat until they were dead. Sekiro's combat just does not lend itself to this kind of boss. Dark Souls' system of dodging and using invincibility frames lended itself much better to fighting multiple enemies at a time. After all, that's why Sekiro has so much emphasis on mini-bosses and bosses instead of an open world or areas in between them. My bigger issue though is that this is reused content from an earlier boss. I've been on record as saying that Elden Ring does get a pass for reusing so many bosses because there's 200 or so of them. In Sekiro, that's not the case. The surprise second phase in your first encounter with the Guardian Ape is one of the most shocking moments in a Soulsborne game that I've experienced. The second ape coming in just feels like a store-brand version of that. I have no idea what our Lord and Savior Miyazaki was thinking here, and even as the biggest FromSoft glazer on the platform, I just have no defense for this one. Overall, it does not get any worse than this, and it will be dead last in our ranking. Great Shinobi Owl is fought after the pivotal moment where you choose your ending, specifically when you forsake the Iron Code and stay loyal to Kuro. This old shinobi was our next big step up in difficulty, and he's going to put your deflect skills to the test big time. By this point, you know the combat system and how to parry, but I like this turned it up a notch and focused on the perfect deflections, because if you spam L1 instead of timing it perfectly, that massive sword does so much posture damage that it can put you back on your heels, and you'll really feel like you're playing from behind the whole time. While Genichiro is a morally gray antagonist, the old owl is the one real evil villain of this story, and this piece of shit sure fights like one. Narratively, I understand it fits that he fights dirty, but it didn't make it any less annoying. Those orbs that stop you from healing are pretty obnoxious, and the pools of poison he put on the ground in Phase 2 reminded me of being screamed at by my World of Warcraft guild of grown-ass men while I was just 12 years old, which did trigger my post-traumatic stress disorder. One exception is that he can Mikri counter you. I was shocked the first time it happened to me, and he has a much improved version later when we'll get into him more in depth. But because our first encounter is a pivotal moment in the story, lets me live out my fantasy of beating up my father, and the unique factor of the owl countering your shinobi skills while having his own, I placed him A tier, ahead of the Guardian Ape. First of all, how dare you? You betrayed Kuro, really? Well, you get exactly what you deserve for that choice. Less bosses and a first phase of killing your waifu. Keep telling yourself it's just fictional and it's just a video game to cope, but you know, deep down, doing the sure ending feels like shit and you're depressed about it. And real quick guys, these Soulsborne and FromSoft videos take a ton of work. If you are enjoying the video, please consider giving it a like, and for my future Souls-like videos, why not subscribe? You can always take it back later, but if not, I do hope you're enjoying the video because a lot of work does go into these. Anyway, Emma doesn't offer much challenge, quite honestly. I'm not sure why she's even considered her own boss by some people when Genichiro before Isshin the Sword Saint isn't, because after a few deaths when you first attempt her, she just becomes a stepping stone for the real boss, Isshin Ashina. In Phase 1, Isshin combines graceful and flowing attacks with brutal Ichimonji doubles. I adore how the aging samurai is on death's door, and he doesn't have the athleticism he did have in his prime, but he still knows his craft enough to sidestep your attacks from neutral by an inch, maybe a millimeter, which leaves you vulnerable to attack if you're not quick. It reminds me of an athlete past his prime who may not be able to throw the ball like he used to, but he still has the brains. Phase 2 is where things really ramp up. He has multiple fire attacks that can one-shot you, but if you stay calm, they can easily be punished by circling him around him and getting in a ton of hits that way. That's a big if though, because just remember, if you die, it's back to Emma in Phase 1 every single time. I have to be honest guys, I'm just not as high on this boss as most people are. I've done him the least of any of the bosses because I only did one evil monster, awful person playthrough, and the other times have been in the gauntlet just for fun. Because when I want to face off against the leader of the Ashina clan, I almost always go for the better fight against the Sword Saint. I think it's cool there's an ending for an evil playthrough, and they do a great job of making you feel evil, but Isshin Ashina doesn't give me enough incentive to ever do it. I know a lot of people love this boss, but I just don't see it. Let me know in the comments what I'm missing, but this isn't an objective ranking, and for me, he's only in the B tier, behind Lady Butterfly. The True Corrupted Monk is the most underrated boss fight in the game. I did a recent video on the most underrated Soulsborne bosses. You're damn right the Corrupted Monk made that list. I'll start with the overall presentation here because it may be the best in the game. His mask is unsettling and pretty scary. The glaive he swings just chains together so elegantly, and it's in the Fountainhead Palace, which is easily Sekiro's best area. And it's on a bridge. I can't explain why, but bridge fights make an arena cooler. They just do. And finally, that OST is for my money the best in the game and a total banger. The True Corrupted Monk feels very fluid to fight. The glaive and its long reach feel different, and I love when he chained together a few attacks, pausing after each one. I always end up playing less aggressively than other bosses, and maybe that's a me thing, I'm not really sure, but it does give it a different flair. After the first death blow, he channels a lot of shadows that attack you. It's an intense transition into phase 2. It's very similar to Lady Butterfly, but more engaging and with an actual strategy to avoid it. Using your grappling hook and swinging from tree to tree was pretty sick. I don't use Shinobi tools much, so on a personal note, the game forcing me to do this to survive was one of the only times I felt like a true ninja making use of everything in my arsenal. It's a great battle, but I wasn't a fan of the terror attacks. Our Lord and Savior Miyazaki is a troll after all. Despite our protests, he loves these instant kill effects almost as much as he loves poison swamps. The caterpillar just came out too quickly for my liking overall. The presentation and flow of the battle brings the True Corrupted Monk to the A tier. It's behind the Great Shinobi Owl, but ahead of the Guardian Ape. The Corrupted Illusion is a boss, and it exists. It has one long phase instead of 3 ones, and it is susceptible to snap seeds. I can't really bring myself to have any strong opinions or come up with some fake script about this, so let's just put him in the C tier and call it a day. It's mediocre and a worse version of a great boss. I have always defended spectacle fights in the Soulsborne series. The Divine Dragon is one of them, and these do get a lot of hate by people who are looking for a challenge to overcome or in-depth mechanics. How I play video games and what my channel is about is honestly kind of for the casual gamer. I play these games a lot, but I don't think of them on too deep of a level. The Divine Dragon is a cool experience. What more does it need than that? Forget it's a boss for a second and think to yourself, was this part of the game fun or was it not? That's an easy yes from me. It's held back because phase 1 is pretty tedious and annoying to do each time you die, but that really shouldn't happen too much anyway. But this is a scenic spectacle boss at its best, and I don't have much other notes on him mechanically, but we will place him at the top of B tier, ahead of Lady Butterfly and Isshin Ashina. Owl Father is phenomenal. Right away, it becomes clear he's much faster. Bro is flying around throwing shurikens at you, and it's anime as hell. Owl Father is low-key a weeb's wet dream. Shinobi vs Shinobi, Katana vs Katana, and the classic father vs son trope, and it's a rematch, and I love it. The fight itself is insanely hard, but in all the best ways. 2 of his attacks are particular, thrilling to punish, and some of my favorites in the entire series. When he throws firecrackers at you, I always dodge to his side and get off a thrust attack. It makes me feel like the deadly, fast, agile warrior that I've become over the course of the game. And the other attack, it's just so good. He throws his fire arrow flying at you, and if you're able to dodge it through a jump, you have a somewhat difficult Miku counter opportunity. I love these oh shit kind of moments where an enemy has a very dangerous attack, but you are rewarded like this for surviving it. Nothing is worse than an attack like Melania's waterfowl dance, where it's overpowered and that's that. But pulling this off is just peak Sekiro, and it's as good as it gets. Like most bosses, staying hyper aggressive is the move here. His posture regenerates fast as hell, and he has a massive health pool, and he has some shinobi tricks up his sleeve, but not as many as he did in your previous encounter. This one comes down to Sekiro at its simplest, a good old-fashioned sword fight. And that's when this game is at its best. Overall, Owl Father is similar to the Great Shinobi Owl fight, but it's better in every way with a faster pace, more fair difficulty, while being harder and just flat out more fun in general. I'm placing him S tier as one of the best Soulsborne bosses of all time, but still just behind Genichiro. The fact this is one of the best Soulsborne bosses and is not first in our ranking says it all about Sekiro combat and its bosses. Next up we have the Demon of Hatred. I don't understand why this boss is so divisive. It feels like 50% of the fan base thinks he's a top tier Sekiro boss, and the other half is correct in thinking that this boss is an abomination and the team behind it should be beaten with hammers for making this atrocity. It does status effect damage with burns, it has bullshit hitboxes, there's plenty of awful AoE attacks. It doesn't even play like a Sekiro boss in the worst ways. It's 3 stages, by the way. Very long. It's endless. I hate him so much. I've played this game so many times, and in countless attempts, I've only killed him twice. He commits the ultimate Souls-like sin of being really hard and not fun whatsoever. I'm not trying to be a hot take guy here. I honestly think he's in the bed of chaos tier. I'm not joking. Partly because of his defenders that all gaslight each other into saying he's a good boss, because he's not. It's like when a song is over 10 minutes. Fan base pretends it's an amazing song. It's so artistic, it's so great. But even if Hatred is in a similar spot because everyone who beats it wants you to know it, these people are gaslighting you. It's dog shit. Don't listen to them. It's the worst boss in the game. I'm not joking. It's awful. Don't listen to these people. F tier. This is it. The ultimate test of everything you've done and the culmination of Sekiro. Every single thing you've learned to this point is going to be put to the test in your greatest challenger yet, greatest samurai to ever live in this fictional version of Japan, Sword Saint Isshin. Get ready for the fight of your life. Ever since Dark Souls 1 started the trend with Gwyn, it's been a bit of a running joke that some significant story bosses end up being past their prime or a shell of their former self. That's not the case at all here. Isshin is in his prime in all his glory and equipped with the mythical Mortal Blade. After steamrolling Genichiro, likely without even being touched, Sword Saint Isshin's first phase really isn't too bad. You may have been confused as to why this boss was so hyped in its difficulty. For me, I definitely thought it was thrilling and fun to fight, but I wasn't really convinced yet. But after delivering a cold-ass line about his thrill for battle, lock in. By now, I knew I had to be aggressive and in his face, but his relentless attacks kept making me intimidated to go for it. Isshin has always been fond of the one-armed wolf, and he's going to give you one more life lesson. Hesitation is defeat. I promise you, you are never going to unhear that with how many times he says it every time he kills you. Phase 3 is more of the same. It should be easier because now you can send him some lightning reversals, but I think FromSoft knew what they were doing here. But is the boss any good? Well, dear viewer, it doesn't get any better. The challenge may be overwhelming, but it's another example of the challenging but fair difficulty that FromSoft usually gets right. When I died, I knew it was my fault. In all of gaming history, this is an S tier boss, and the best boss in Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, and a moment I'll never forget, much like the unforgettable moments in Elden Ring I talk about in the video on the screen now. Love you guys, see you in the next one.